The Crown Rule 1858 to 1947. Government of India Act of 1858. This significant act was enacted in the wake of the revolt of 1857, also known as the First War of Independence or Sufi Mutiny. The act, known as the Act for the Good Government of India, abolished the East India Company and transferred the powers of government, territories, and revenues to the British Crown. Features of the Act. It provided that India henceforth was to be governed by and in the name of Her Majesty. It changed the designation of the Governor General of India to that of Viceroy of India. He was the direct representative of the British Crown in India. Lord Canning thus became the first Viceroy of India. It ended the system of double government by abolishing the Board of Control and Court of Directors. It created a new office, Secretary of State for India, vested with complete authority and control over Indian administration. The Secretary of State was a member of the British Cabinet and was responsible ultimately to the British Parliament. It established a 15-member Council of India to assist the Secretary of State for India. The Council was an advisory body. The Secretary of State was made the chairman of the Council. It constituted the Secretary of State in Council as a body corporate capable of suing and being sued in India and in England. The Act of 1858 was, however, largely confined to the improvement of the administrative machinery by which the Indian government was to be supervised and controlled in England. It did not alter in any substantial way the system of government that prevailed in India. Indian Council Act of 1861, 1898 and 1909. After the Great Revolt of 1857, the British government felt the necessity of seeking the cooperation of the Indians in the administration of their country. In pursuance of this policy of association, three acts were enacted by the British Parliament in 1861, 1892 and 1909. The Indian Council Act of 1861 is an important landmark in the constitutional and political history of India. Features of the Act of 1861. It made a beginning of representative institutions by associating Indians with a law-making process. It thus provided that the Viceroy of should nominate some Indians as non-official members of his expanded council. In 1862, Lord Canning, the then Viceroy, nominated three Indians to his legislative council: the Raja of Banaras, the Maharaja of Patiala, and Sir Dinkar Roy. It initiated the process of decentralization by restoring the legislative powers to the Bombay and Madras presidencies. It thus reversed the centralizing tendency that started from the Regulating Act of 1773 and reached its climax under the Charter Act of 1833. This policy of legislative devolution resulted in the grant of almost complete internal autonomy to the provinces in 1937. It also provided for the establishment of new legislative councils for Bengal, Northwestern Frontier Province, and Punjab, which were established in 1862, 1866, and 1897, respectively. It empowered the Viceroy to make rules and orders for the more convenient transaction of business in the council. It also gave a recognition to the portfolio system introduced by Lord Canning in 1859. Under this, a member of the Viceroy's Council was made in charge of one or more departments of the government and was authorized to issue final orders on behalf of the Council on matters of his departments. It empowered the Viceroy of issue ordinances without the concurrence of the Legislative Council during an emergency. The life of such an ordinance was 6 months. Features of the Act of 1892. It increased the number of additional non-official members in the central and provincial legislative councils but maintained the official majority in them. It increased the functions of legislative councils and gave them the power of discussing the budget and addressing questions to the executive. It provides for the nomination of some non-official members of the Central Legislative Council by the Viceroy on the recommendation of the provincial legislative councils and the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and that of the provinces legislative councils by the governors on the recommendation of the district boards, municipalities, universities, trade associations, jamindars, and chambers. The Act made a limited and indirect provision for the use of the election in filling up and some of the non-official seats both in the central and provincial legislative councils. The word election was, however, not used in the Act. The process was described as nomination made on the recommendation of certain bodies. Features of the Act of 1909. This Act is also known as Morley-Minto Reforms. Lord Morley was the then Secretary of State for India and Lord Minto was then Viceroy of India. It considerably increased the size of the legislative councils, both central and provincial. The number of members in the Central Legislative Council was raised from 16 to 60. The number of members in the provincial legislative councils was not uniform. It retained official majority in the Central Legislative Council but allowed the Provincial Legislative Council to have non-official majority. It enlarged the deliberative functions of the legislative councils at both the levels. For example, members were allowed to ask supplementary questions, more resolutions on the budget, and so on. It provided for the first time for the Association of Indians with the Executive Council of the Viceroy and Governors. Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join the Viceroy's Executive Council. He was appointed as a law member. It introduced a system of communal representation for Muslims by accepting the concept of separate electorate. Under this, the Muslim members were to be elected only by Muslim voters. Thus, the act legalized communalism, and Lord Minto came to know as the father of communal electorate. It also provided for the separate representation of presidency, corporations, chambers of commerce, universities, and jamindars. Government of India Act of 1919. On August 20, 1917, the British government declared for the first time that its objective was the gradual introduction of responsible government in India. The Government of India Act of 1919 was thus enacted, which came into force in 1921. This act is also known as Montego-Chelmsford Reforms. Montego was the Secretary of State for India and Lord Camilton was the Viceroy of India. Features of the Act. It relaxed the central control over the provinces by demarcating and separating the central and provincial subjects. The central and provincial legislatures were authorized to make laws on their respective list of subjects. However, the structure of government continued to be centralized and unitary. It further divided the provincial subject into two parts, transferred and reserved. The transferred subjects were to be administered by the governor with the aid of ministers responsible for the legislative council. The reserved subjects, on the other hand, were to be administered by the governor and his executive council without being responsible to the legislative council. This dual scheme of governance was known as diarchy, a term derived from the Greek word diarch, which means double rule. However, this experiment was largely unsuccessful. It introduced for the first time bicameralism and direct elections in the country. Thus, the Indian Legislative Council was replaced by a bicameral legislature consisting of an upper house, Council of State, and a lower house Legislative Assembly. The majority of members of both the houses were chosen by direct election. It required that the three of the six members of the Viceroy's Executive Council, other than the Commander-in-Chief, were to be Indian. It extended the principle of communal representation by providing separate electorates for six Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians, and Europeans. It granted franchises to a limited number of people on the basis of property, tax, and education. It created a new office of the High Commissioners for India in London and transferred to him some of the functions hitherto performed by the Secretary of State for India. It provides for the establishment of a Public Server Commission. Hence, a Central Public Commission was set up in 1926 for recruiting civil servants. It separated for the first time provincial budgets from the central budget and authorized the provincial legislature to enact their budgets. It provided for the appointment of a statutory commission to inquire into and report on its working after 10 years of its coming into force.